Curiouser and curiouser, cried Alice. Wish I could find that rabbit hole and tumble away to Wonderland.
Okay, stop me if you've heard this one before. A down-on-their-luck orphan has their life turned upside down when they get whisked away to a fantastical new world. There they suddenly have magical powers and must reluctantly rise to become the hero its people need to stop an evil threat. If that sounds like every fantasy book you've ever forgotten you read, it's probably because Forspoken is a remarkably generic RPG, from its bland story to its lifeless open world. Thankfully, its flashy parkour and energetic combat do keep the relatively slim campaign decently entertaining throughout. But running through its boilerplate checklist of side tasks doesn't hold much appeal beyond mindless trophy hunting after that. The newest action RPG from Square Enix puts you in the brooding shoes of Frey Holland, a well-acted but largely unlikable New Yorker. Frey is pulled through a portal to the fantasy realm of Athia and accidentally becomes bonded to an equally unlikable talking armband she calls Cuff.
Cuff? That's a bit reductive, isn't it? Cuff?
The 4 remaining realms of Athia have been afflicted with a corruption that has forced its populace into the last remaining city of Sepal, and it falls on Frey and her newly imbued powers to help its citizens by facing 4 powerful rulers called Tantas. Not that she's all that interested in doing so.
If you want to save your city, do it your f***ing self.
Forspoken's world and story are about as bland as they come, equal parts predictable and forgettable, and mostly told through exposition dumps between large stretches of open-world exploration. Across the 15 hours it took me to beat the campaign, the writing never does a good job of establishing any of its characters or the relationships between them, constantly assuming we must already be invested in these people in a way it never actually earns.
We must execute her immediately!
Wait, what? No, that's crazy! I don't even know how I got here! Please, listen to me.
The most egregious example of this is the chemistry between Frey and Cuff, which frames most of Forspoken as a sort of buddy cop movie, but spends almost no time showing these 2 unlikely partners genuinely growing closer together. That means their snippy banter comes off as obnoxious rather than endearing.
Can we just not talk?
Fine. Fine by me. Suit yourself. I love a bit of silence.
Fantastic.
Frey is surprisingly vocal about her disdain for most of the tasks you're asked to complete.
Not super into the idea of going in here.
And Cuff constantly belittles her for no good reason.
Reasonably impressive, I suppose.
Reasonably? Kiss my ass.
I think it's supposed to come off as sort of friendly ribbing, but instead it feels like awkwardly watching a couple argue at a dinner party. This dynamic never really changes, and it is always exhausting.
You absolutely sound like that.
No, you absolutely sound like that. Yeah, see? 2 can play at that game.
You're f***ing stupid.
Some conversations and cutscenes can also have a stilted feel to them. The performances throughout genuinely aren't bad, even when the writing leans heavily into telling rather than showing, but none of it is very fun to listen to thanks to long, awkward pauses between lines and occasional crowd noise or background music that's so loud it drowns out the dialogue.
The Tantas are deeply connected. They may be able to do anything, but they are.
When you're not in Sepal talking to townsfolk and doing mundane side quests like chasing cats, you're generally given a target on your map and free reign to get as distracted as you'd like along the way. That involves sprinting across Athia's rocky terrain using Frey's magic parkour skills, flipping over obstacles, and then beating the snot out of enemies at various points of interest for new equipment and other rewards.
That went well.
This is what you'll be doing for the vast majority of your time with Forspoken, and it can be a lot of fun, even if those systems never get too deep. Frey gains 4 styles of elemental magic over the course of the campaign, each essentially a different weapon you can quickly swap between, with its own set of alternate fire modes and unlockable support skills. Her starting magic is basically an earth-based gun that can be fired rapidly or charged for an area of effect burst.
You're mine!
With abilities that root enemies to the ground, up your defense temporarily, and more. And as you play, you can modestly upgrade all of those skills. It's a little annoyingly restrictive until you do unlock more options, though. For example, you don't even have a melee attack until you unlock the fire-based sword about a third of the way through the campaign. But once you do open up more of Frey's capabilities, Forspoken's particle effect-filled combat becomes quite amusing. Enemy variety isn't exactly impressive, and it has a bad habit of recycling initially cool mini-bosses until they're a lot less fun to fight, but elemental resistances and unique quirks pushed me to frequently swap weapons and strategies in a way I really enjoy.
This'll do it.
For example, I loved that the shielded enemies could be dealt with either by getting behind them or by charging an AoE shot and then firing it at the ground nearby to knock them off their guard. One-on-one fights can devolve into locking onto your target and mashing the right trigger while you strafe out of harm's way with Forspoken's extremely generous dodge system, but the more common group encounters often did a good job of keeping me on my toes. The parkour system is a similar mix of straightforward and flashy, sending you nimbly soaring across the environment by simply holding down the circle button and pointing yourself in a given direction. Just like your attacks, this becomes more fun once you unlock some cooler skills, like options that boost your speed with well-timed button presses. That said, it's also far more mindless than combat, requiring very little nuance even as additional techniques become available to you. Even still, it can be quite a satisfying way to fancifully flow from task to task without much thought. That's a good thing too, because there is a considerable amount of ground to cover in Athia, and very little of it is worth stopping to admire.
This place isn't much to look at, huh?
This world is huge, and the campaign doesn't even send you near half of it. The map is littered with optional side objective markers, but there isn't much reason to go too far off the beaten path to complete them when the same small handful of tasks available are repeated ad nauseum no matter where they're placed. They almost all boil down to either fighting some random dudes to earn a reward or just being handed one outright, and the payoffs don't feel particularly necessary on the normal difficulty setting.
Good night.
Plenty of open world games follow a similar structure, but Forspoken does it with such a bare bones transparency that Athia comes off less like a world for you to explore and more like a repetitive checklist asking to be crossed off. It also doesn't help that Athia lacks much in the way of interesting visual landmarks, mostly filled with piles of samey rocks and ruins. Each of the 4 regions offers some twist to their layout, but they'd still mostly blend together if it weren't for the blunt color filter slapped onto each one. After the credits rolled, I ran around this map for another dozen or so hours, hoping to find some exciting secrets in the hard-to-reach corners I hadn't visited yet. But with the sole exception of an isolated trader selling a few neat items, all I saw was the same side tasks on these same bland landscapes over and over and over again. Look, I'm sure there will be die-hard completionists out there excited for a chance to put on a podcast and spend dozens of hours clearing every single map marker and opening every single chest, but I was given very little motivation to do so here. Forspoken is a kind of game you've probably seen before, from its stereotypical fish-out-of-water fantasy story to its giant open-world map full of repetitive optional tasks. Its combat is flashy and fun enough to entertain across its comparatively short RPG campaign, with fights that do a decent job of pushing you to shake up your use of Frey's elemental powers even when the overall enemy variety isn't particularly impressive. Its parkour system is also satisfying enough despite the scenery you're running through being about as picturesque as a bowl of rocks with an Instagram filter slapped on it. There's a kind of person that might be enough for, happy to spend hours and hours uncovering every inch of Forspoken's needlessly large map. But that doesn't mean I was able to find a compelling reason you'd want to. For more, check out our reviews of One Piece Odyssey or Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion. And for everything else, keep it right here on IGN.
How about some rubs right here?